My name is Irving Wender, and I'm one of the few people who are in catalysis, perhaps, who was born on the island of Manhattan. Unfortunately, my father passed away when I was about 1 year old, and although I had a mother, I was raised in an orphan home some 30 miles north of New York City in a place called Tuckahoe. When I came back to the city at about 12 and went to a high school called DeWitt Clinton High School, which had the enormous number of pupils, had over 10,000 students. And when I graduated, while in that high school, I think my career was chosen for me by a chemistry teacher named Dr. Whitsitt. He spelled it W-H-I-T-S-I-T. I remember him well. He had a sort of a white goatee, very distinguished gentleman. And he and one or two other authors had written a high school chemistry book. And in later years, I found the book in an old bookstore, and I still own it in his honor. He told me one day that he thought, he asked me if I considered going into chemistry as a career, and while at the time I hadn't thought of going into anything as a career, I was influenced by that, and then he asked me to teach a class one day. He asked me for a teacher class in a week or so. Well, at the time, it was very hard for me to speak before a group of people, and so I used to blush a lot, and it was difficult, but I had to agree since it was a command performance, and I think I gave probably one of the worst lectures anyone ever heard on whatever subject it was. But he did have his influence, because after that, I could only see one career, and that was to major in chemistry, which I have pursued and did. After high school, I enrolled in the City College of New York, which at that time was a free school. I think it still is. I'm not sure about it. The only fee we had to pay was a chemistry breakage fee at the end of the year. And I studied chemistry, and it was a good school, and I liked it. And from there, I went to Columbia University for a master's degree. But I did finish all my course requirements and everything for the degree, but I had hoped to get a PhD and did not take the qualifying examination because I entered the Army. That was during World War I. And even for the master's degree, you had to take the same qualifying examination. So I left without really getting a degree at the time, and entered the Army. It turns out I later did get the degree from Columbia University, and I'll tell you about it. In the Army, I was put on a 90mm aircraft gun for about a year in uniform, then asked to take a special test given to thousands of people called the ASAP Advanced, whatever it was, ASTP, Advanced Training something or other. Anyway, I took this test and was classified as an advanced chemical engineer, although I was a chemist, and sent to VPI, Virginia Polytech Institute, in, where is that?
Blacksburg.
Oh, Blacksburg, Virginia. Very pretty place. I was sent there I was told I'd be there a week and then be reassigned somewhere. Well, almost a year later, I was still there. Which reminds me, I was put on I was put to work with a Professor Willebrand, who was a very famous chemical engineer, running up and down distillation columns, which didn't seem to be very worthwhile. And so I left that, and I was allowed to enroll in whatever I wanted. And so I enrolled in bacteriology courses, taking in that year all the courses they had to offer, including graduate courses. And believe it or not, getting a small grant from the AAAS to do research. But that ended because at the end of the year, by the time that came through, I left. While I was at BPI, I don't know why it's not important, but I did have a touch football game where I jumped up for a pass and my head hit someone else's head. My wife had come down to BPI because I'd been down there for so long. And I felt fine, but I couldn't remember anything. So I was put into a hospital and asked what my name was. Well, I knew my name. I was asked what my Army serial number was. Well, I 326123448. I knew it perfectly. And then I was asked whether I was married. I was, but I could not remember. I said, I think so. And they said, well, if you are, what's your wife's name? Well, I couldn't remember that. My wife has never forgiven me. But after a day or so, I regained my memory and things were all right. And then one day, about a year later, went out they called out some names, and they called my name out and said I was being assigned to Oak Ridge, Tennessee. My wife, who was born in Chattanooga, Tennessee, raised there in Tennessee, I asked her where Oak Ridge was, and she said she never heard of the place. And I said, that's the way they teach geography in Tennessee. But of course, Oak Ridge had never existed before the war, and there was really no way she could have known. But I was shipped along with 8 people to the University of Chicago, where I was supposed to be, or I was really assigned to Oak Ridge, but supposed to be liaison between the University of Chicago Metallurgical Lab, which is working on the atom bomb, and Oak Ridge. When I arrived in Chicago, I was ushered into an office, in uniform, I was in uniform, Army uniform. I was ushered into an office with Captain Baranowski, who introduced himself as such, dressed in civilian clothes, and which is rather amazing. And he said that I'm in charge of this project, and all of you will have to get into civilian clothes too. And so he put the 5 of us up in a hotel, Hotel Miramar, a small hotel in Chicago South Side. And I called my mother and asked her to send my civilian clothes to Chicago. And she wanted to know why, and I said I couldn't tell her. She said, well, you must be are in the process of being discharged. And I said, no. And she said, well then, are you going to be a spy? I said, no. And then she said, well, what are you going to do? I said, I can't tell you. Fact is, I really didn't know at the time what I was going to be. Anyway, she finally did send them, and as it so happens, we had to stay in a hotel, could not leave, had to eat our meals there for about 18 days. It was really an ordeal. But 3 of us got our clothes on the same day, and we got dressed in civilian clothes. After a year in the Army, it felt very odd to be walking the streets in civilian clothes. We all needed haircuts, so we marched down to a barber shop, had 2 chairs, and 2 of us getting haircuts, and 1 of us was sitting there, feeling very self-conscious. And the barber suddenly turned to us and said, are you fellows in the Army? And we said, why do you ask? He said, you're all wearing Army socks. And I could see that we never were meant to be spies, because